The US president now says the school could lose its tax-exempt status, accusing Harvard of not acting in the public interest. Mr. Trump has already frozen more than $2 billion worth of federal funds after the school refused government demands for reforms. They included getting rid of diversity programs and screening international students. Trump officials say they are combating anti-Semitism after multiple incidents involving students from elite universities responded to the war in Gaza. The White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, says anyway, Harvard doesn't need the money.
More than $2 billion out the door to Harvard when they have a more than $50 billion endowment. Why are the American taxpayers subsidizing a university that has billions of dollars in the bank already? And we certainly should not be funding a place where such grave anti-Semitism exists.
The escalation is now pitting the president against one of the most important, famous and valuable educational institutions, if not institutions per se, in the United States. Just look at this. Harvard was founded in 1636, so it is older than the United States itself. It has educated 8 US presidents, a popular icon in culture, depicted in movies like Social Network and even Legally Blonde. It is a private, non-profit institution. It receives federal funding for research and other projects. In 2021, 9% of the total revenue, including Harvard, came from the federal government. Kevin Liptak is at the White House. The administration must feel that it is on strong ground going against such an important organization as Harvard, even though many of the people in the building behind you will be alums from Harvard.
Yeah, and President Trump is someone who in the past has pointed to a Harvard degree as sort of the ultimate qualifier to work in his own administrations. He's someone who sees the Ivy League as the best picking ground for his own aides. So it is, I think, somewhat ironic that he has picked this fight with Harvard. Yes, I do think he believes that he's on solid political ground, at least with his own supporters, trying to paint Harvard as essentially a hotbed not only of anti-Semitism, but of liberalism and a campus that is hostile to conservatives. I am not entirely sure that he will be on solid legal ground, because when you talk to academics in the United States, they do see this all heading to the courts, challenging the freeze of that $2.2 billion in funds for the university. And I think it's important to note where that money is going. You know, it's not going necessarily to support, you know, these undergraduate programs that had been, in the administration's views, hotbeds of anti-Semitism. It's going to medical research and science research, places that are trying to develop, for example, cures to cancer. That's part of what the federal government is funding up in Cambridge. And so I think it's just important to note where that money's actually going.
Why do you think Harvard didn't cave when other universities did?
Because they have a $50 billion endowment and can afford to stand up to the Trump administration in a way that a lot of these other Ivy League schools can't. And I'm thinking, for example, Columbia University, which faced a very similar list of demands from the Trump administration and came to a settlement with them just in the last few weeks. Their endowment is far smaller than Harvard's. Harvard's is the oldest university, but it's also the wealthiest in the country, and it has a lot of money behind it to both fund potentially some of these lawsuits, but also to fill any gaps where that federal funding might be stopped.
And on this question, I mean, one of the things about Harvard, which I was always fascinated to read, is that apparently, you know, they don't even look at students or potential students. They don't even look at whether you can pay before they accept you. They are completely blind on the question of resources, and they basically will pay anybody's fees and living expenses if they get in and can't afford to go.
Yeah, and that's where a lot of that endowment ends up going, particularly for, the undergrads at Harvard, in the attempt to make it a more egalitarian campus. If you are smart enough to get in, you'll be able to go, even if you can't afford to go there. I think from the Trump administration's perspective, all of that money can be used to separate itself out from the federal government. And in an era when President Trump is, one, trying to cut down on government funding all across the board, but two, when he's trying to go after institutions in the United States, whether it's in higher education or the arts or law firms or the media, that this is an area that they think they can go after. And so, it remains to be seen how this will play out in the courts, but it is, the first example really that we've seen in academia of putting up this resistance to ever more aggressive Trump administration.
Kevin, I'm grateful. David Walt is one of the professors hit by the Trump funding freeze. The professor's part of Harvard's medical school and has lost hundreds of thousands of dollars in research grants. It follows months after he was awarded the National Medal of Technology and Innovation, the highest honor in his field. The professor joins me now from Massachusetts. Professor, so you've lost this grant money. Was it specifically lost in a sense, you were told you were losing it, or was it just a whole swathe of grants were withdrawn, and yours was unfortunately one of them?
Well, Richard, I'm not quite sure how to answer that question because there's very little information. Last week, I received notice that my grant funding for a grant that's aimed at early diagnosis of ALS, also known as Lou Gehrig's disease, and was canceled for the second year. I'm presently in the first year of the grant, and that it would end effective June 30th. This morning, when I came to the office and opened my email, I was shocked to find that I had received notice from the Department of Health and Human Services that even this year's funding was canceled effective immediately. I have 3 people working on this project here at Harvard who I'll need to find other funds or simply stop working on the project.
That was going to be my next question, the effect of this. Let's look at the effect in terms of research. And try not to lose me with too much of the detail in terms of the technical detail. But the research that you're doing is designed to do what, and who will be the loser as a result of it not continuing?
Well, I think the big picture, before I get to my own specific research, is that cancellation of funding to researchers across the U.S. will delay medical progress and will threaten public health. There's no question about those outcomes. These cancellations will cost lives that could potentially have been saved in the future if the medical research was allowed to continue. Look, I'm not young, but I'm still doing research because I'm committed to helping patients. My lab specifically works on neurodegenerative diseases, cancer, infectious diseases that have the potential to enable early detection. They can help discover new drugs, and they can potentially lead to cures for these devastating diseases. And so if we can even solve one of these problems, right, it will benefit many, many patients. That's my motivation. And to take that opportunity away from me and other dedicated researchers, in my opinion, is a travesty.
When you are in the canteen and the cafeteria and in the staff dining rooms and bars, and you're talking to your fellow professors, your fellow faculty, and how damaging is this, firstly, to Harvard as an institution, and secondly, to, if you will, Research USA, capital R, capital U, capital SA, as a world-class home of innovation and research?
Yeah, I think that at least the effect on Harvard is to be determined. As I understand it, there's possibility of this going to the courts. I'm not involved in any of that, but I can answer the second part of your question. And I think these cancellations, I think one of the biggest effects is that they're going to affect young people who want to enter these STEM fields. Job hiring here is paused. Acceptances into graduate programs are being cut. And the future workforce in these fields of science and technology will not be here in the US. This is going to have devastating consequences on innovation, education, and the economy for years to come. The US, in my opinion, is ceding our science and technology leadership to China and to other countries.
Professor, we will check in with you again as this continues, because if we may, sir, and I'm grateful and honoured that you took time tonight to speak to us. Thank you for joining us, Professor. Thank you.
Thank you.